Scientists think that this is the discussion of the limbic system is outmoded. It should be, I don't know what they want to replace it with, but these groups of nuclei do work together in what is described as the emotional brain. But it has to do a little bit with more than just emotions. It has to do with desire, not just sexual desires, but motivation. Okay? So some of us are motivated by fear. We don't want to have our kids laugh at us if we get an F in A&P. Or we are afraid of our parents, grounding us if they find out that we've done something. And so our motivation is fear. Some of us are motivated by accomplishment. We get a feeling of accomplishment and pleasure when something gets done. All right, so there's different factors for motivation, but those are involved in the limbic system as well. So the limbic system is formed of a series of structures, some of which we've already discussed, and some of which we haven't yet. And one of them is they're shown here, the cingulate gyrus. Remember, that was the gyrus associated with the anterior cerebral artery right over the corpus callosum. The hippocampus, connected to the mammillary bodies by the fornix. And then just in front of the hippocampus, we have a pair of structures known as the amygdala, or amygdala bodies. And then part of the thalamus as well is considered to be part of the limbic system. So the part that's lighting up here is the hippocampus. All right, we described that already, being associated with formation of short-term memory and storage between the hippocampus and frontal lobe as long-term memory. So the hippocampus is gray matter. It's found in the floor of the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle, and it communicates with the mammillary bodies of the hypothalamus, which are right here, via white matter, which is the fornix. So here are two columns of the fornix passing over the thalamus and then coming down to the mammillary bodies. In front of the hippocampus is the amygdala. So recognition of fear and anger. All right, so talking to somebody, and they're getting madder and madder and madder, and so you decide maybe you better be quiet and say this some other time. Okay? Assessing the level of danger. So there's a classic experiment done with babies where two desks were put together with a gap of about 3 feet and a thick plate of plexiglass across the top. And the babies would crawl across that space and not pay any attention to the fact that it was 3 feet down to the floor. They didn't have that assessment of the depth or the danger. As they grew older, so 15, 18 months, 2 years, they would get to the edge of that and stop, because they could see that the floor was down there and they didn't have the trust of the plexiglass to support them. Even if you stood on it, they wouldn't crawl across it. And this was really illustrated to me. My husband's old job, in their older building, they had a highly polished marble floor, and it was white marble and black marble. And right in front of the bank of elevators was black marble, and it was so polished you could see yourself in it. And so this dad walked in to the elevator, and kind of trailing behind him was his 3-year-old son. And the dad's standing in front of the elevator, and the kid gets to, about 10 feet from him, gets to the black marble and just stops. He will not step across onto that void. And the dad kept calling him, and the kid would not, the dad was standing on it, but the kid would not go. The dad had to go over and take him by the hand and walk him across that shiny black marble. Okay? So that's that, assessing the level of danger. And that kid had assessed it and wasn't going to go there. All right, so the amygdala, we'll make this with our clay models on Tuesday. It's a gray matter, the circular gray matter, just anterior, kind of on the very edge of the inferior horn, just anterior to the hippocampus. Okay, cingulate gyrus is this area right over the superior to the cortex, to the corpus callosum. Recognition of facial expressions. All right, it also has to do, it's involved with learning and the rewards of learning. Okay, something I wish my older son would enjoy. He goes more with the fear than the reward. But I mean, he's very proud when he learns something, but not proud enough. We drive him, I think, more than he drives himself. But some people, that's all they need, all right, is their own satisfaction with something to do a good job, whether it's making the bed or creating some object in the kitchen or mowing the lawn, you know, whether it's creativity or a task. They can't leave until it's a good job, okay? So part of that is the cingulate gyrus as well. Also involved in this, not just recognition of facial expressions, but involving the parietal lobe is recognition of people. Jane Goodall has she died yet? Well, anyway, she came here and spoke. Well, I thought she had died, and then anyway, she came here and spoke at AR. She was involved in the 70s with the first setup of observations of gorillas. And one of our faculty mentioned when she came here to speak a few years ago that she cannot recognize people's faces. It's not that she doesn't see them, but she doesn't distinguish from one person's face to another. She can't remember that she's met you before, or not even that she's met you, but when she looks at you and then another one, that there's a difference between those faces. And so it's a combination of the association area and the visual cortex with the cingulate gyrus as well.
Did you tell the gorillas apart?
That's why it must have developed afterwards, because that was the first part of her what her observations was being able to tell the gorillas apart, and who was who and what was doing what, and the familial levels of organization. So I think this developed later in life, because she's like in her late 70s, 80s. All right, so again, the dentate gyrus you don't have to identify for lab, but that's out here, and the hippocampal gyrus is right here. So learning and long-term memory we described already. And it works with the dentate gyrus in the learning process by reward. Okay, so it's like if I can learn all the parts of the limbic system, in the next hour I can go for a run, or I can have a piece of candy, or I can, whatever, using that reward system is the cingulate gyrus can increase the effectiveness of the hippocampus.
I had written that for the hippocampus it's short-term memory, but it's...
You have to lay down short-term memory first.
Oh, okay.
So hippocampus, the mammary body, which is right here, is short-term memory, and then it connects to that bottom part, the basal forebrain, to do long-term memory. But we have to lay down the short-term memory to create it into long-term memory. So when the hippocampus is destroyed, you don't lose what you've already learned. You lose the ability to create new memories. And then in Alzheimer's, they eventually lose the long-term memory too. So they forget even basic body functions, you know, how to feed themselves, how to use the bathroom kind of thing. So that's a more progression of, but usually it's just it starts out with the short term.
Okay.
And that begins with between the hippocampus and mammary body. So here you can see the mammary bodies. This would be thalamus, again, third ventricle. Here is hypothalamus. And this is mammary body. And again, the white matter leading from the hippocampus to the mammary body is the fornix. And so we can see part of the fornix here. It comes together. So if my thumb is the hippocampus and my finger is the fornix, hippocampus is out in the floor of the lateral ventricle. Fornix comes together over the thalamus and then slightly separates to get to the two mammary bodies. All right? So again, here is hippocampus. This is fornix, and then it slightly separates to get to the mammary bodies. Right.
So it's just the connection of the
Right,
two.
it's just white matter connecting the two gray matters. So the hippocampus is gray matter, and the mammary bodies are gray matter, and the connection between them is the mammary body. Now, I don't know what it has to do with memory, but if mammary bodies aren't working very well, you have unusual licking habits. So I don't know, I've never tried it. Maybe if you licked a lollipop while you studied, I don't know if that would interfere with or help your memory. But yeah, there's lesions of the mammary bodies. You have somebody that's constantly going. So I don't know if good licking helps memory or bad. I don't know. That would be a good. I'll have a bowl of lollipops up here for our next exam. You can try it out. All right. So again, here's the hippocampus in the inferior horn, and again the relationship. So hippocampus is in the floor, and tail is in the root of the lateral horn of the hippocampus. Okay? All right, so reticular formation. You don't have to know, by the way, all of the stuff on page 88. I'm not going to ask specific lecture questions of that. That's more for interest's sake. Just understand that those structures are involved between short-term memory and long-term memory. But I'm not going to ask specific questions from these boxes. Okay? You're not going to have to reproduce all of that specific to each structure. Now recognize that hippocampus and mammary bodies and basal forebrain are required for memory, between short-term and long-term memory. That's about it. Okay, the reticular formation, or reticular activating system, is a vague area of gray matter within the brainstem that sends fibers, neurons out to the thalamus and out to the cerebral cortex. To illustrate, when you are asleep, someone can lift up your eyelid and you won't see anything. Light is activating rods and cones, all right? And the rods and cones are sending the information through the axons to the thalamus, but it's not getting from the thalamus to the cortex, and if it does, the cortex isn't processing it. So you're not seeing anything. You're sound asleep and someone can come and say good morning to you, but you don't process that in your primary auditory cortex. It's still causing a vibration of your tympanic membrane and activation of action potentials in your auditory neurons to the thalamus, but you're not processing that. Okay, so that has to be activated when you wake up, and that's part of what the reticular formation system does.
So like if the phone's ringing when you're sleeping, but you're dreaming it as you.
Now that's an in-between. Yeah.
Kind of waking
We'll
up.
look at sleep in just a moment. Yeah.
All right.
But this is the system that kind of brings you from unconscious, semi-unconscious levels through sleep up to being conscious. All right? So we can measure the electrical activity in the brain and get a graph of it. Similar, it's really a comparison. We'd have to put electrodes into the brain to get direct activity. So when we put electrodes on the surface of your skull, that's getting a comparison between the electrical current of the skin and the brain, kind of the difference between an electrocardiogram. We're not sticking electrodes in your muscle of your heart, but comparing between the skin and such. And so we have these different wave systems that are present. All right? The first two are when you're awake. And the last one is when you're asleep. And theta waves are more often in children. We only see them as you merge into sleep in the adult. If you have them all the time, there's some brain disorder. So stages of sleep. You guys know what NREM and REM sleep are. It's the rapid eye movement, which occurs during dreaming. All right? So when you're awake but you're relaxing, alpha waves are present. That's the relaxed but awake stage. Okay? Has anybody ever consciously been able to determine I am now
In a dream.
asleep? I've only done it once. You try it when you're going under anesthesia and stuff, but then you wake up, and even if you were able to do it, you can't remember. But one time I was about 11 or 12, I was falling asleep, and I actually remember thinking, I'm now falling asleep. And now I'm out, kind of thing. I don't remember thinking I'm out now, but just microseconds before I was asleep, consciously aware that I was asleep. Okay? So the alpha wave is relaxing. Okay? Beta waves would be you're awake and you're doing stuff. So hopefully while you're taking A&P exams, you're having beta waves. Okay? Not delta waves. Certainly not theta waves, but concentrated awakeness. Then as you start to fall asleep, you start to see sleep spindles, which I haven't shown in there, but you're merging into delta waves. And what I want you to know is that delta waves are deep sleep. Okay, this is the, I'm so sound asleep, you know, nothing will wake me up. The phone, your iPhone alarm goes off, bong, 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 and everybody else in the house is awake, but you aren't. So my older son still sleeps this deeply. He was supposed to meet me at the car shop this past summer. I called him at 7:30. I said, okay, I'm at the office now, and I'm leaving for the Toyota place in 30 minutes, meet me there. And an hour and a half later, he called and said, why didn't you call me and tell me I'm late? You know, why didn't you call and wake me up? And I said, I did. I called you at 7:30. We had a whole conversation. He doesn't remember any of it. When he was in high school, I went with a friend to a basketball game and sent the kids home with another friend. My husband was out of town. And I got home about 11:15, and they'd gone to bed, and nobody would open the door for me. And both the boys were on the front of the house, so I'm banging and knocking. My oldest son's windows were not, the window wasn't open, but the blinds, the shutters were open, and I could see him in the bed, sleeping. So I'm banging on the window, and 15 minutes later, he finally sits up. I go, great, I can go to bed. He reaches over and he closes the shutters. And of course, in the morning, he didn't remember anything. I went around the side of the house and banged on my daughter's window. And finally, about 25 minutes later, my youngest son came to the bathroom and said, Mom, is that you? And I said, yes. He said, well, I heard you the whole time. I just thought somebody else would come and let you in. But anyway, delta sleep is when people sleepwalk. All right, so same oldest son that closed the shutter on me. We get up at night to go to the bathroom without realizing that. Okay, so he lifts up, instead of lifting up the lid to the toilet, he lifted up the lid to the canister vacuum and peed into the vacuum. You can mad. I mean, he didn't know what he was doing, but still, I now put the vacuum cleaner on the opposite side of the house, but he didn't know where it was. So some people have actually committed murder and have been charged with first-degree murder, and their defense was sleepwalking. Some of them have gotten off, and some of them haven't. It was made into a TV movie. I think this particular case was Canada. There was one case in Canada where they got off and one case in the States where they didn't, or vice versa. Anyway, he was having money problems. He had borrowed money from his in-laws, and that was the motive that was given by the prosecutors for the murder. They lived about 20 minutes apart, at least. He got in the car, drove to their house, walked inside. The mother-in-law confronted him, and he, I believe, if I remember right, stabbed her and drowned her in the back pool. And they said to do all that, he had to have been awake, and it was the finding out about how much money he had lost kind of a thing was the motive. And he said no, that he had been sleepwalking, he loved his in-laws, he would never have done anything like that. And people that are sleepwalking apparently can become very violent if you interrupt them in their sleepwalking. And that was the defense. And like I said, I didn't have time to look it up, but I know in one case it was the jury accepted that as the defense, and in another case it wasn't accepted, but it's been tried multiple times both ways. And then as you move back, so that everybody cycles through these different stages and then they return back through them. So as you're coming back up to these stages, you pass through REM sleep or REM sleep, and that's the dreaming stage. Okay? So as you go from stage 4 back up to stage 3, you go through REM sleep first. And it's called rapid eye movement because this is the dreaming stage, and your eyes are moving around. For some people, their feet move around, their hands move around, kind of a thing. You can see dogs, kicking. When I was pregnant with my oldest son, we were in a house that had those broad stairs, and our room was at the top. And I woke up, and my husband was kicking and throwing his arms around, and looked like he was foaming at the mouth, and scared me to death. And he wouldn't stop, but I threw myself on top of him, and that kind of woke him up. And then he was kind of sheepish, and I said, "What was going on?" And he said, "I dreamed there were 2 guys coming up the stairs to attack you, and I was trying to get out of the covers, so the covers were the guys fighting with him, and he was going to go after them." But I find that I don't know when I dream, but the dreams I remember are when I wake up around 3:30 or 4 and then go back to sleep again. Those are the dreams that I remember. I'm sure I dream other times, but those I'm not cognizant of.
So this isn't like a cycle, it's a.
It's so you would go through, you wouldn't necessarily come up to the stage 1, but you would cycle through the stage 2 or stage 3, stage 4 REM, back up again through stage
2, 2,
yeah.
4.
You go up and down, end up. And so when you feel that you have slept but you aren't very rested, is when you never get down to the stage 4. Your sleep is being interrupted and you're moving up before you really get to the deep sleep stages. But people that can move into that quickly can power nap. They can fall asleep for 20, 30 minutes, be really well, awake and rested because they've been able to move down into that deep sleep relatively quickly. Okay.